What up, corn jerkers? We're back to read the second part of The Monkey's Paw. Remember, we've been talking about foreshadowing. Okay, that is clues that the author gives you that hints about something that's going to happen later in the story. We've been talking about theme. Theme is what the author is trying to tell you about life or human nature. Okay, so we've been talking about those two things, and let's just jump right back in to part two of The Monkey's Paw. In the brightness of the wintry sun, next morning as it streamed over the breakfast table, he laughed at his fears. There was an air of prosaic wholesomeness about the room which it had lacked on the previous night, and the dirty, shriveled little paw was pitched on the sideboard with a carelessness which betokened no great belief in its virtues. "I suppose all old soldiers are the same," said Mrs. White. "The idea of our listening to such nonsense! How could wishes be granted in these days? And if they could, how could 200 pounds hurt you, father?" "Might drop on his head from the sky," said frivolous Herbert. "Morris said that things happen so naturally," said his father, "that you might, if you so wished, attribute it to coincidence." "Well, don't break into the money before I come back," said Herbert as he rose from the table. "I'm afraid it'll turn you into a mean, avaricious man, and we shall have to disown you." His mother laughed, and following him to the door, watched him down the road, and returning to the breakfast table, was very happy at the expense of her husband's credulity, all of which did not prevent her from scurrying to the door at the postman's knock when she found that the post brought a tailor's bill. "Herbert will have some more of his funny remarks, I expect, when he comes home," she said, as they sat at dinner. I dare say," said Mr. White, "but for all that, the thing moved in my hand, that I'll swear to." "You thought it did," said the old lady soothingly. "I say it did," replied the other. "There was no thought about it. I had just— What's the matter?" His wife made no reply. She was watching the mysterious movements of a man outside who, peering in an undecided fashion at the house, appeared to be trying to make up his mind to enter. In the mental connection with the 200 um, in the mental connection with the 200 pounds, she noticed that the stranger was well dressed and wore a silk hat of glossy newness. 3 times he paused at the gate and then walked on again. The 4th time he stood with his hand upon it, and then with sudden resolution flung it open and walked up the path. Mrs. White at the same moment placed her hands behind her, and hurriedly unfastening the strings of her apron, put that useful article of apparel beneath the cushion of her chair. She brought the stranger, who seemed ill at ease, into the room. He gazed at her furtively and listened in a preoccupied fashion as the old lady apologized for the appearance of the room and her husband's coat, a garment which he usually reserved for the garden. She then waited patiently for him to broach his business, but he was at first strangely silent. "I was asked to call," he said at last, and stooped and picked a piece of cotton from his trousers. "I come from Ma and Megan's." The old lady started. "Is anything the matter?" she asked breathlessly. "Has anything happened to Herbert? What is it? What is it?" Her husband interposed. "There, there, mother," he said hastily. "Sit down and don't jump to conclusions. You've not brought bad news, I'm sure, sir," and he eyed the other wistfully. "I'm sorry," began the visitor. "Is he hurt?" demanded the mother wildly. The visitor bowed in assent. "Badly hurt," he said quietly, "but he's not in any pain." "Oh," said the woman, clasping her hands. "Thank goodness for that. Thank—" She broke off suddenly as the sinister meaning of the assurance dawned upon her, and she saw the awful confirmation of her fears in the other's averted face. She caught her breath, and turning to her slower-witted husband, laid her trembling old hand upon his. There was a long silence. "He was caught in the machinery," said the visitor at length, in a low voice. "Caught in the machinery," repeated Mr. White in a dazed fashion. "Yes." Okay, so what happens here? What happens is that their son Herbert had gone out to work, and then this man comes up to inform them that he was caught in the machinery where he worked, and he was killed. Okay, now the way the author does this is by using dialogue. Dialogue are words spoken by the characters in the story. So the narrator is not just saying Herbert was killed, but you find out through this conversation that's happening. Now, in your notes, you'll want to put a dialogue is words spoken by the characters in a story. Words spoken by the characters in the story, that's dialogue. And dialogue can be a way that the author uses to talk about foreshadowing, to talk about the theme of the story. And here, that's what we have here. It is also communicating different things that happen in the story. And here it's communicating that Herbert is dead. He sat staring blankly out the window and taking his wife's hand between his own, pressed as he had been wont to do in their old courting days nearly 40 years before. He was the only one left to us, he said, turning gently to the visitor. It is hard. The other coughed and, rising, walked slowly to the window. The firm wished me to convey their sincere sympathy with you and your great loss, he said, without looking around. I beg that you will understand I am only their servant and merely obeying orders. There was no reply. The old woman's face was white, her eyes staring, and her breath inaudible. On the husband's face was a look such as his friend the sergeant might have carried into his first action. I was to say that Ma and Megan's disclaim all responsibility, continued the other. They admit no liability at all, but in consideration of your son's services, they wish to present you with a certain sum as compensation. Mr. White dropped his wife's hand and, rising to his feet, gazed with a look of horror at his visitor. His dry lips shaped the words, "How much?" £200 was the answer. Unconscious of his wife's shriek, the old man smiled faintly, put out his hand like a sightless man, and dropped, a senseless heap, to the floor. Okay, so if you look here, and we go back and reread part of that paragraph where it says, I was to say that Ma and Megan's disclaim all responsibility, and we go on there, it gives us more details that support the theme of the story. Remember, we talked in part one about the theme of the story being that fate determines all things. That fate determines all things, and that you shouldn't try to change fate. Well, what happened here when Mr. White wished his first wish? When he held up that monkey's paw and wished for £200. A pound is similar to like $1 in England. He wishes for £200, and does he get it? Well, the answer is yes. But what happens? Well, he only gets it when his son dies, and the company gives him 200 pounds as a gift to make up for the fact that their son died. And so because his wife screams and then he himself faints because he can't believe that his wish has come true. Okay, don't forget to like, don't forget to hit subscribe and do all that fun stuff. And in the next video, we'll tackle part 3, and the assignment goes along with this.